Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar today. My name is Ben Hutchins, and I am part of the marketing team here at Innovise, an Autodesk company. Today, we'll be focusing on assessment and management of flood resilience for cities. Now, let me introduce you to your expert for the webinar today. We are delighted to be joined by Paolo Tamagnone, a hydraulic engineer at RSS-Hydro and researcher. The duality comes from a past straddling both the commercial world and academia. Over the years, he has developed an extensive experience in the world of hydraulic numerical modeling, using a variety of models, both academic and commercial, for the analysis of extreme events in fluvial and urban environments. His passion for modeling has always guided his studies, in which he continually introduces the most modern innovations. He is also very active in sharing and disseminating knowledge and techniques with the national and international community. With us today, we also have our regular host, Ruth Clark, Innovation Manager at Innovise. Ruth is a civil engineer with over 25 years experience working in the water industry.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on assessing and managing flood resilience in cities. As we will see shortly, Paolo has used Innovise's InfoWorks ICM software to help him carry out the study that he's going to discuss.
First of all, thanks for being here, attending this webinar. I would say good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. And today we are here because I'm going to present you some outcomes of pluvial flood hazard assessment studies in urban areas that we have developed in the past month of years, exploiting the capabilities of advanced hydraulic numerical modeling. Nowadays, we are living in an era characterized by a fast urbanization, where more and more people are moving to urban centers for different kind of motivational purposes, for job, for changing life, and whatever. But even if located far from water bodies, this doesn't mean that the risk of being affected by flood is reduced to zero. And indeed, we are constantly bombarded by news from every corner of the world, where our cities are strongly affected by the harsh impact of climate extreme. And here, some screenshot just taken from the end of last year, the beginning of this year, of really a huge number of cities affected by climate hydrometeorological extremes. I will start presenting first studies that we developed during a research project in Italy, where in order to investigate the impact of these really meteorological extremes on the UNESCO Cultural Heritage City of Florence, the University of Florence started with a project called Talete, that had the aim of protecting the cultural heritage preserved in the district of Santa Croce. And as you know, as probably you know, the historical city center of Florence, and especially the Santa Croce district, contains two of the most important cultural heritage sites in Italy, meaning the Santa Croce Cathedral and the National Central Library of Florence. That is one of the biggest national central library in Europe. But looking at the geographical location of this area, we can immediately spot that it is dangerously exposed to a multiple source of hazard. First of all, we have the river flooding due to the proximity to the Arno River. Indeed, this area was strongly affected by the catastrophic flood that occurred in 1966. And secondly, less obvious, is the hazard that lies beneath the surface, namely the overflowing by the sewer network. Indeed, the internal drainage network of the analyzed complex is directly connected to the urban and public sewer system. In order to study all these phenomena and investigate the hazard related to extreme rainfall, we exploit the potential of InfoWorks ACM, and we developed a ad hoc 1D2D dual drainage model to basically investigate to provide a comprehensive evaluation of the interaction between let's say I will list first the internal drainage network, so the network of pipes draining the two buildings that I mentioned before, so the National Central Library and the Monumental Complex of Santa Croce. Then the urban sewer system, so the public sewer system carrying, in this case, since Florence is an old city, it carry combined water, so black water and rainwater. Considering also the surface runoff processes. So as you can see the animation of the hydrodynamic simulation. We used this software in order to simultaneously calculate the water level and the surcharge condition into the drainage network, while the bidimensional engine was simulating the flood propagation over the surface. And here, the scale of the analysis was really a micro scale. And here we were able to evaluate the flow propagation into the building. The results of this kind of hydrodynamic analysis have been essential to define all the critical points of the network, recognize the most vulnerable areas and spaces, and investigate the dynamics of a potential inundation, or even, for example, reconstructing what happened during the catastrophic flood of the 1966. So, having all these results and this better understanding of the hydraulic behavior of the system, of the drainage system, and the topography itself, all this information allows the decision maker to propose, for example, sustainable, technical, suitable, more than sustainable, suitable, because we are speaking about a cultural heritage site, technical solution for safeguarding the heritage and all the important assets contained in this area. And for example, here thanks to this kind of approach, we or the decision maker are able to analyze both non-structural or hard engineering solution to protect some areas, or also non-structural strategies, for example, for the management of the hydraulic risk led by this pluvial flood. So we saw a case study where the scale of the analysis was quite, let's say, the small scale. So we analyzed one district of one city. But if we want to have a look at what happened at the administration level, we can say that authorities, water managers, urban planners, and also engineering offices are usually interested in understanding the hydraulic behavior of their entire territory, because they are managing an entire area. And also they are really interested in knowing which is the impact of any modification, not just, for example, taking a new building. They don't want just to know which is the level of risk or the exposure of that new building, but they want also to know how this new modification will impact the entire system or the entire territory. So the challenge here is that, and we can summarize with this question. How to upscale a comprehensive analysis, so in this case, a comprehensive flood analysis without sacrifice quality and precision. Because usually when in hydraulics and hydraulic modeling, when we are analyzing a small scale, we can, let's say, introduce a lot of details. But then when we want to study the problem at the largest scale, we start introducing a lot of hypotheses, simplification. So, but what if we want to collect and maintain a high level of precision in our model? And Rat, I will say that we can start with the first pool now, before moving to the second part. And here we want to ask you, which kind of approach, numerical approach, do you use for this kind of pluvial flood analysis in urban areas? Because as we know, the urban environment is really, really complex. It contains a lot of features. I guess I can go ahead, right? Or I wait for the
Sure. Yeah. No, you can keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So we saw the first study case at the city center of Florence and the cultural heritage site of Santa Croce. And here we present another studies at the biggest scale. We know that the continuous anthropological alteration of the territory, as I said before, also the concentration of assets in cities, make this highly exposed to natural hazard. And in order to deeply evaluate the level of risk to which all cities are exposed, it is important to consider the system as a whole. Because the source, as we have seen just for a small district, but is even more true when you consider a city, the source of hazard and risk are multiple and sometimes are even unpredictable. In the studies that I'm presenting here, the city of Differdange in Luxembourg has been chosen as a test case to conduct a comprehensive pluvial flood hazard assessment at the city scale. And I would say also, and even beyond, because we have to consider not just all the feature and the territory belonging to the administrative border, of the city of Differdange, but we had also to consider all the cross-boundary catchment outside of the administrative border of the city, since they were collecting water then was running through the territory of the city of Differdange. And as before, the assessment has been conducted, implemented a fully coupled dual drainage model, and also I will add high resolution hydraulic model, able to simulate all the processing occurring above and beneath the surface. So again, here we exploit the full potential of InfoWorks ECM to do that. But let's go through which were the data used in our model. We took advantages of the extensive data set of freely available geographical data in Luxembourg. And among them, we use the high resolution digital elevation model, which is publicly available at the 50 centimeter resolution. That is a fundamental input to the representation of the surface. And here you can see just from this profile that with such resolution, we were also able to appreciate the microtopography of the street. And especially when we are speaking about pluvial flood phenomena, even the microtopography may alter the flow path along the street. Okay. Another high resolution informative layer is the land cover that is retrieved from the most up-to-date aerial imagery with an accuracy of 20 centimeters. This information especially allows the flood modeler to have an accurate spatial distribution of the important parameter influencing the rainfall runoff transformation, such as the infiltration and the imperviousness degree through the territory, and also affecting the runoff propagation, meaning the roughness of the surface. Then, in order to take in account all the obstacles present in a complex urban landscape, the most up-to-date cadastral information has been used to shape the computational mesh and better represent the complex topography of the urban scape. As, for example, the footprint of the building, the edges of the road where the curves are, and also we were able to force the mesh using break line through the rivers and natural and changing in the topography. Then, since we are speaking about a dual drainage model, the essential data is the technical specification of the drainage network. And we were lucky because we got the information from the technical offices of the city, including the location, the size, elevation, material, and all the technical features belonging to the main pipeline of the city. The one that I was called, that before I was calling urban sewer system. But then, in order to fully couple the surface model with the underground system, and so really digitally or giving or recreating a digital representation of the reality, or now is very hot term saying the digital twin of the reality, we needed the inlet points present in each street. So connecting the surface with the drainage network. As most of you know, this kind of data is often or almost always unavailable, unfortunately. And so, in order to overcome this limitation, we developed a GIS application that is able to automatically generate the location of the street inlet, elaborating all the high-resolution informative layer that I shown previously. As you can see from this screenshot, the algorithm performed properly, even guessing sometimes the exact location of this point. So, collecting all this information all together into the InfoWorks CCM environment, we built our model of the city of Differdange. And just to give you some figures about our model, we have about 9,000 nodes and pipes representing the drainage network, and about 1.3 million of cells that we use to discretize the 35 square kilometer of the surface and the territory analyzed for the city. Then, as is important and fundamental step of any hydraulic and hydrological modeling, we had to test the reliability of the model. And to do that, we simulated the extreme event that occurred in June 2021. That was a very catastrophic, that generated catastrophic flood in the Central Europe both in Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. And we compared the results of the simulation with the information reported by the city authorities and media. All the reported info helped us to highlight first the problem in the implementation of the model and improving the model, and then to do this Calval process. At the current stage, as you see here, the hydraulic model is able to properly represent the flow dynamics and what happened really back then into June 2021, and with a slight overestimation of the flood depth about around 20 centimeters. Here I will immediately say that this kind of validation, because during the validation of our model, the flood modeler needs measurement, but most of the time in case of flood we don't have exact measurements. So luckily now media helped us a lot, because we can have a large number of images taken by basically everyone, every citizen, even not expert. Just the only problem is that most of the time we have picture, for example, from where we can estimate the flood depth, but most of the time we are lacking the timing of that picture, so we are not sure if that was the moment corresponding to the peak of the flood or the rising or the decreasing part of the curve. Here, I would say just here are some outcomes of this kind of modeling activity, modeling approach, and insights that we are able to extract from the model. And here, for example, we can plot simultaneously the flood propagation over the territory and see what happened even in the drainage network. So looking at the surcharging status, the water level, and also where overflow occurs. And then, for example, another example why it's important this kind of 1D to D approach is when, for example, we have the presence of or depression of embankments. For example, this is a case of a highway crossing the flow path of a small stream. The simulation of the culvert is fundamental to letting the water flow from the upstream to the downstream. Because in a simple 2D modeling approach, the water will accumulate behind the infrastructure. And in order to avoid that, the flood modeler needs or to apply a manual modification of the terrain in order to burn the DTM in correspondence of the culvert. But however, we have to consider that this kind of approach will lead to an overestimation of the culvert capacity. Instead, using our dual drainage modeling approach, we can introduce the right size of the culvert, and so we can simulate properly what's happening in reality. Here, for example, other insights that we are able to extract from the software. So for every node, every element of the model, we are able to see and to extrapolate all the variable information and also the time series, how this variable evolves in times. Here, for example, you can see for one node the flow, the inflow, so the flow coming from the surface to the drainage network, and then the level on the surface, and the level in the main node. Another important, for example, aspect, especially and also InfoWorks ECM allow to create some comparison graph between different scenarios and quickly and easily see the performances of two different, say, for example, design scenarios. So trying to simulate, if we want to simulate different mitigation techniques, we can see immediately or we can compare the efficiency of the two, and so we can choose which is the best one. But we have to consider. We highlighted the strength of using a 1D 2D approach, but as I saw from the pool, most of you are using this kind of approach. The difficulty and the effort that we need to implement such a model is very, very high. So also the quantity of information and the technical details are very, very high, exponentially higher than a simple, let's say, a more conventional 2D surface approach. So we decided, in order to evaluate the importance of considering also the drainage network, and also motivate our effort compared to a more classic 2D approach, we implemented two specular models. One dual drainage model, so in which the drainage model is present, and one without. And then we decide to compare the outcomes. And for example, here you can see the difference and the comparison between the outcomes for the simulation of the extreme event 2021. We have to say that the event 2021 was very, very extreme event, so it led a lot of them. The entire network was over capacity, was surcharged in all of the point, because it was not able to carry or to drain all this water coming from the sky. And so in this kind of configuration, or for this kind of event, and as we know, the drainage network of facility, sewer network, is not designed to drain extreme events, but more for draining events with a low return period. And here we can see directly from the comparison between the two simulations that the high differences in water depth, because it's one of the most important variable when we see the flood hazard. So we have high differences when we are in presence of a functioning drainage network that is able to drain the surface, so basically to suck water from the surface into the drainage network, or the presence of, let's say, infrastructure, like I was saying before, embankments of depression that can stop the water. Indeed, for example, you can see, if I can use the pointer. For example, here we were in the same location of the video, and we can see here that neglecting the presence of the culvert beneath the embankment will lead to a huge accumulation of water behind the infrastructure, and here as well. And then, so in this map, the green will represent more water depth in the just 2D model. Instead, the red one, it representing more higher water depth in the dual drainage model. And this is reflecting the fact that the culvert will allow the water going or running from upstream to downstream and then into the city in this case. Instead, we can highlight that small differences can be seen when along the roads, because in that case the drainage network is already full, is over capacity, so it's not able to drain more water from the surface. Conversely, for example, here we simulated a lighter, say, rainfall event with a return period of 10 years. so closer to the design of the drainage network. And in many cases, we can see that a huge difference is considering and not considering the drainage network, because the presence of the drainage network is able to drain the surface, and so we don't see, let's say, inundation of the street anymore. And here we can see some cases where the street, so the street and the surface are drained by the system. So running the end, here I listed some consideration that are important for this kind of modeling. So the implementation of this kind of the detailed hydraulic model require a vast amount of input data and a deep knowledge of the system, a modeling experience, a vast modeling experience, I would say, and if it's possible, field verification. However, the advantages are multiple, so we can motivate our effort in introducing and implementing such kind of model. First of all is the improved accuracy of representing a complex flow path through the complex topography of an urban landscape, meaning considering the flow path through street, pipes, open air, and underground channels. Secondly, having more flexibility in simulating multiple scenarios, because we can, in this kind of approach, both introducing modification of the surface, so terrestrial or topographical modification, but also in the elements of the drainage network. And for example, in considering the multiple scenarios, we are also able to take into account multi-hazard sources, considering also the lack of maintenance or malfunctioning of the drainage network. And then, for sure, having a better understanding of the entire system behavior, avoiding some overestimation typical of the only to the surface model, as we have seen in presence of infrastructure or like highway or embankments, and allowing a more realistic assessment of the flood hazard, identifying critical areas and being able to design effective solution. And with this summary of consideration, I will thank you everybody for the attention, and I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you really very much for that, Paolo. That was great. It was really clear, and actually I really loved the graphs or pictures showing the differences. It just makes it much easier to understand the impact. I hope you are now prepared for some questions. We've had quite a lot of questions there. One thing that I would like to comment on is the final poll there, which is how the audience view the importance of including a drainage network. It was very high that people agreed it was important to include that. I am now
also about that. I can also add a small detail, because I'm happy that everybody just chose that answer. So yes, it's important. It's also because now all the professionals, they know that the new trend in this kind of pluvial flood analysis is the consideration of the drainage network, because we know that the cities are spending millions every year in maintaining and improving the drainage network. So now that we have the tools, we have the capabilities, it's time to consider all the elements of our territory in our pluvial flood hazard studies.
Okay, I'm going to come on to a number of the questions that have come in whilst you were speaking. So I will curate these as they start to pile up. So apologies if we don't get round to asking your question. Considering the scale of the model that you built, what is the sort of computational load of running these kinds of simulations? Well,
okay, yeah, this is always an interesting question, especially when here we are speaking not about black box, but we are speaking about numerical models. So numerical models are there to solve for us the hydraulic equation, and the computational load is always an important factor during the hydraulic process and numerical process. So in this case, we exploited the benefit of InfoWorks ECM being completely parallelized on GPU. So we were able to use the GPU solver that is is much faster than the old CPU solver, and also all nowadays there is also this trend to move to calculation from CPU to GPU. So exploiting the high number, of course, of graphic cards. And I have to say that InfoWorks is very efficient is computationally efficient. So it is in terms of absolute runtime for this model, we were about 30 minutes. So it was quite fast. And also there is the ability of the flood modeler is to optimize and carefully build the computational mesh in order to reduce, or in order to avoid bottlenecks in the computation. For example, having too small computational cell that will drastically slow down the simulation. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so, but even in that case, I would say that it's very efficient. So usually, even at this scale, the simulation are quite fast.
Yeah, perfect. That actually segues nicely onto some of the other questions. Okay. The first one would be, what type of geometrical or geographical features do you think it's important to include in an urban drainage model?
Okay, I mean, for sure, as every 2D analysis, a good DTM is the digital terrain model, is always the most important data. That for sure, above all, the quality of the DTM play a big role. Indeed, I would say most of the time it's better to spend time at the beginning to check your DTM rather than later striving to understand why the model is performing maybe in a strange way or in not physical or understandable manner. Then for the drainage network, I mean, we need some essential data, that is the location of the pipe and the elevation. The elevation is very important because since the water follow the gravity, we have to know the slope of each pipe. That is an essential data. So the accuracy in the upstream node and the downstream node of a pipe is an essential data to correctly simulate the propagation of the flow into the pipe.
That would lead... It's like we practice this, because this is leading very nicely onto other questions that have come in. Where did you get the drainage information, that information about the pipe set diameters? Was it provided by the local water utility or?
No, here, I mean, Luxembourg is a particular environment because it's a small country, and this kind of data is most of the time is managed by the technical offices of the city. Okay. So they provided us this data, and they provided us, for example, the location of the nodes and all the geometrical information. So in the size of the pipes, the elevation of the pipes, also the material, because also the material is very important, and the shape of the pipe, because in a city you can have multiple shape, from circular shape, the most common, then you can have a rectangular shape or even strange shape. And I will say, especially not for the second case, but for the first case, the city center of Florence, when you have to deal with an historical city, many times, I mean, we say, especially in Italy, we have piece of a sewer network that maybe dates back, I don't know, 1,000 years. We are still using the Roman sewer network in some cases. So we have also to introduce some particular shape that are out of the standard that we use now in the engineering practices. So, yeah. So
I thought we had old pipes in London, but I think you win there with your 1,000-year-old pipes.
Exactly. No, and then I will say, was just adding that was provided for the main pipeline, but then in order to couple or to, let's say, realistically couple the surface with the drainage network, the inlet points, the entrance point of the drainage network are the street inlet. So, but that kind of, and that would be also another interesting question. If other professionals, they know with cities, they have this kind of data, because sharing knowledge with colleagues and so on, most of the time, really most of the time, at least the street inlet are unknown with the location. And so for this reason, we created this algorithm to predict and automatically generate this street inlet that then we plug it into the overall drainage model.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions actually asking if you could go into a little bit more detail about that application. If you could give any more information. I don't know if it's a very large subject or...
I mean, I cannot, I would say we used all the geometrical information, high resolution information, topographical information, that cadastral information as well, that we were able to actually freely access from the GIS database of the state of Luxembourg, because here most of the data are openly available. And so, and then we developed a GIS algorithm to calculate the location of this node. Now we are seeing, we are planning to make this algorithm openly available in some GitHub or some repository, but we are still working on it. We want to validate our algorithm with further data, and especially field data, because as I say, we needed the ground truth in order to assess that one. But then we can see in the next future. Maybe we are planning to make it openly available.
Okay, I've got a very quick question here. How was the rainfall applied? Was it directly to the mesh, or was there some other approach? And if it wasn't directly to the mesh, do you think applying it to the mesh or not is the best approach?
Okay, since we try to really create a digital twin, so mimic the reality, we also implemented our model to being as close as possible to the reality. So the rainfall was applied over the mesh, as it happened in the territory. So the rainfall runoff transformation was calculated per each cell, and then the runoff, once the runoff was intercepting a street inlet, was then based on the Weir equation, was drained by the drainage system itself. And then we simplified over the building, since the building is something that we want to exclude from our mesh in order to have an inner boundary condition. But in that case, if it's not meshed, then you have also to take into account the water that falls over the roof. So in that case, we simplified. So we used the 1D subcatchment for the roof of each building. So basically following the footprint of each building, and each subcatchment was draining to the closest node of the sewer.
Yeah. So but really important to not double count for rainfall.
Exactly,
in this
not
case.
double counting, and also in this way actually is close to the reality, because actually apart if a really catastrophic event, all the water that fall over a roof then is collected by the gutters and immediately directed to the drainage network. So actually that rainfall, that amount of water cannot become a overland roof.
Yep. The next question, sorry, getting a lot of questions. Did you notice a difference in time between the model with the drainage network and the one without?
Sorry, I didn't get the point.
So when you run the model that's simply the sort of 2D runoff, or the one that's got that 1D drainage network in it, did you notice a difference in time? Did including that drainage network increase the run times, or was it not a great big impact because the 1D model will run more quickly than the 2D, or was there?
No, this is a good question actually, and I didn't, put a lot of attention, if I have to be honest, but I can say that the just 2D is faster, because the coupling the two models, also you have to know, for sure that the time step in which the flow propagation on the surface and the drainage network is calculated differently, because we are using different set of the equation and different set of temporal step. But yes, it's lower even because every point that is connected to the surface is an additional equation that the solver has to solve, basically, and sometimes it's not easy to arrive to convergence when you have this movement of water from the surface to the drainage network and opposite direction, so in case of overflowing. So yes, it is slowed down. Using just 2D is faster.
Okay, that's great. There's a couple of questions that have come in that are very, very specific to the software that we can, as the Innovise team, answer afterwards. But one of them I thought was quite interesting, about the ability to use spatial rainfall in the software. And actually that is available. If you've got radar rainfall, for example, you can bring that in as a time series of radar cells. So that's a possibility, and that can be applied across 1D or 2D models. Absolutely no problem. So I'm just trying to scroll down. There's so many questions coming in. There was a question about being able to use a stochastic approach to evaluate the effects of tidal boundary conditions on urban sewage systems under extreme conditions. I don't know whether this was involved in the Florence work that you talked about previously, or if you've got a view on that. Or
no, in the Florence case, was not a stochastic. Was a stochastic. I say not really. It was stochastic because at the end. No, it was not stochastic approach, but was more evaluating multiple scenarios. And during the presentation, you see there are some references, so you can go directly to the publication to have more detail about the studies. In that studies, we simulated multiple scenarios with different rainfall magnitude and also temporal distribution, because also, as you know, the temporal distribution of the rainfall can affect a lot the resulting flood, because also it will play an important role in terms of infiltration and soil capacity. Mm-hmm. So that case was stochastic in a way that we simulated multiple scenarios, but to assess how different hydrological forcing were resulting in different flood scenarios. Yeah.
So there's all sorts of ways that it can be done. If you've got a tide gauge information, you can plug that in as a time series. But again, obviously the coincidence of that peak tide level, if it's spring or neap tide, with the other things happening in the model would be
yes,
key.
For example, also in the model of Florence, and if you go through the publication, you can see we also simulated these multi-hazard scenarios in which we considered both high level water level into the Arno River and an extreme rainfall arriving, so super unlucky, but whoever can happen. And so in that case, for example, the spillway, the emergency spillway of the drainage network of the city were closed because we were not able to open because they are made with the clapet valves. So since the high water level into the river will not allow the opening of this valve, you have an additional surcharge in your drainage system. So we are also able to compute these multi-hazard scenarios.
Yeah, I'm going to ask one last question and then you can relax. So I don't know whether the urban drainage network in this particular case was a combined system, so whether it accommodated foul water as well as storm water. If it was a combined system, did you account for any flow in the network, the sort of dry weather flow kind of flow, or was this purely taken as a storm kind of model with no dry weather flowing involved?
Okay, in the two study cases that I showed are two different settings because the city center of Florence, since it's an old drainage network, is just combined, just one unique. And in that case, we considered also the black water, considering the population and activities. So we consider this base flow into the network. Even if we have to say that we are speaking about 2 orders of magnitude, because when we consider extreme rainfall event in a pluvial flood hazard assessment, the quantity of water is thousands of times higher than the flow coming from the houses. So it can be, for that kind of study, easily negligible. Instead, in the second case, part of the city was equipped with a double system, so just black water and rainfall water, and the old part of the city was just combined water. And in that case, for example, we neglected, because as I said, the quantity of water coming from the houses during a normal day. And also, we are the temporal scale of an extreme event. And when you analyze pluvial flood hazard or flash flood, or do we want to call these extreme events that lead to this kind of flood, they occur in a short time. So usually in literature, you have to study events that are shorter than 3 hours. So the quantity of water entering the sewer network coming from the industries rather than the houses, I would say, is almost negligible compared to the quantity of rainfall falling from the sky.
Right, I can see that we're getting very close to the hour. I am going to say thank you very much, Paolo. That was great. Really appreciate it. Much. And I am going to now hand over to Ben Hutchins, and I'll say thank you to the audience.
Bye, thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paolo and Ruth, for the webinar today. If you asked a question, as Ruth said, we didn't get to cover, we will get back to you with an answer next week. We will also share links to the more detailed studies Paolo mentioned. I'll also be updating you with details of our next webinar on the 27th of July, when we'll be looking at the new cloud features for Innovyze solutions. And I'll also be sharing the recording of the webinar today. Please remember your feedback is important to us, so take a few minutes to complete this short survey that follows this webinar. And lastly, a big thank you for joining us today. We hope you found our session today interesting and look forward to welcoming you to our future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.